I never thought I would end up like this. At 58 years old, lying in a hospital bed with wires sticking out of my body, I believed my children would be waiting for me. I imagined their worried faces, the way my late wife used to sit beside me during my fevers, holding my hand, whispering, "Don't worry, everything will be all right." But when I opened my eyes after surgery, the room was empty. No flowers, no warm smile, no one. Just the sound of the heart monitor, beeping slowly, reminding me I was still alive, though part of me wished I wasn't. I reached for my phone. My hands trembled. The stitches in my chest pulled every time I moved. With shaking fingers, I opened our family chat. My message was simple. "The doctor says I can leave tomorrow. Can someone pick me up?" I stared at the screen, waiting. 1 check mark, 2 check marks. Seen. A minute later, my son replied, "Dad, call a taxi. I'm watching the game right now." I blinked, rereading it. A taxi? After heart surgery? After everything I had done for him? And then my daughter-in-law added her message, like salt on a fresh wound. "Why don't you stay another week in the hospital? It's so peaceful at home without you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because of the surgery, because of the betrayal. My chest hurt more than any scalpel could cut. I wanted to scream, to remind them of nights when I worked double shifts just to pay their tuition, to remind them of winters when I wore the same old coat so they could have new ones, to remind them of the empire I once built from nothing, the house they lived in, the food they ate. All of it came from my sacrifices. But I didn't scream. I just placed the phone on my chest, closed my eyes, and let silent tears fall. The next day, I waited in the hospital lobby with a plastic bag of medicines and a folder of instructions from the doctor. Other patients were leaving with their families, smiling, hugging, leaning on their children for support. I sat alone on a metal chair, staring at the glass doors. Finally, after hours of waiting, I gave up. I limped outside, flagged down a taxi, and told the driver my address. He looked at me through the rearview mirror and asked gently, "Sir, are you okay?" I wanted to tell him everything, how my children abandoned me, how I suddenly felt like a stranger in my own family, but I just nodded and whispered, "I will be." When I reached home, I found the house strangely quiet. No one cared to ask how I was feeling. My son was glued to the television, laughing with his friends online. My daughter-in-law didn't even look up from her phone. I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the family photo hanging on the wall. It was taken years ago. My wife still alive, my children small and smiling, clinging to me as if I were their whole world. Now those same children couldn't bother to drive a few miles to pick me up after surgery. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My chest throbbed with pain, but my heart throbbed with something deeper, realization. Blood is not always loyalty. The days turned into weeks, and their indifference only grew. I overheard them whispering in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. "He's getting old," my daughter-in-law said. "We can't afford to take care of him forever. He doesn't even earn anymore." My son sighed. "I know, but what can we do? He's still my father." Her voice turned sharp. "Then treat him like a burden. Maybe he'll get the hint." I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep, but inside I was dying. A burden? After everything? One evening, I gathered the courage to speak. At dinner, while they laughed over some TV show, I said softly, "I was thinking maybe I should sell a few of my old shares. It could help us financially." My son looked up, suddenly alert. "Shares? You still have shares?" I nodded slowly. "A few. From the old company." His eyes lit up with greed, the same way my wife's eyes once lit up with love. "That's a good idea, Dad." "You should transfer them to me. I'll handle everything." I smiled weakly. In that moment, I realized the truth. They didn't want me. They wanted what I had left. And maybe that was the night a seed was planted in my heart, a seed of revenge, watered by betrayal, waiting to grow. The very next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Collins?" the voice said. "Yes, speaking. This is Mr. Harris from the firm. We've reviewed your shares. Do you realize their current value?" I frowned. "No, why?" "Sir, they're worth much more than you think. If managed properly, they could be the foundation of a new company, a foundation, a chance, a second life." I hung up, staring at the phone, my mind racing. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope stirred in me. Perhaps, just perhaps, the story wasn't over yet. That night I stood before the bathroom mirror. My face looked older, my hair grayer, my body weaker. But in my eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Determination. I whispered to my reflection, "They left me for dead, but I am not dead yet." And so, in that quiet room, with betrayal burning in my veins and revenge whispering in my ear, my journey began. This was no longer just about survival. This was about justice. That night, sleep never came. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in circles, reminding me of my own life, always moving, always giving, yet ending up in the same place. But something inside me had shifted. Betrayal had carved a wound so deep that only revenge could fill it. I whispered to myself again and again, "They left me for dead, but I am not dead yet." The next morning, before the sun had even risen, I found myself sitting at the old oak desk in my study. Dust had settled on everything: papers, old contracts, forgotten files. It had been years since I opened those drawers, years since I looked at the man I once was, a builder, a leader, A father who carried the weight of an entire company on his shoulders. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the drawer and pulled out a leather folder. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in decades, share certificates, old contracts, the remnants of my empire. I stared at them, my chest tightening. This is it, my chance, my weapon. But I also knew something else. Weapons are useless without the will to fight. I called Mr. Harris, the man from the firm. His voice came through the phone, calm and professional. Mr. Collins, I must say, your shares are not just valuable, they're powerful. If invested properly, you could regain control in the market control. That word sparked something in me. For years, I had been controlled by illness, by grief, and now by the ungrateful children I had raised. But maybe, just maybe, it was time I took control again. I asked him to meet me at his office. Walking into that building was like stepping back in time. The smell of polished wood, the quiet hum of busy assistants typing. It all reminded me of the days when people stood up as I entered a room, when my signature could move millions. Mr. Harris welcomed me with a firm handshake. You've been away from the game too long, Mr. Collins, but your instincts are sharp. I believe you can rise again. I nodded slowly. Inside, I felt my blood stir. For years, I had been treated like a relic, a burden. But here, in this office, I was a man again. That evening, I returned home to the same coldness. My son didn't even notice I had been gone. My daughter-in-law smirked as I walked past, whispering under her breath, "Old men and their silly dreams." They didn't know. They didn't suspect. And that ignorance became my greatest weapon. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains of my room, but I felt none of its warmth. My body was weak, yes, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. All night I had repeated the same words to myself. They left me for dead, but I am not dead yet. I rose slowly, clutching the edge of the bed for balance. Every step hurt. Every breath reminded me of the scar in my chest. But pain had become my companion. It no longer frightened me. What frightened me was the emptiness in my home, the silence that had replaced love. My son passed me in the hallway that morning without a word. My daughter-in-law glanced at me with irritation, as though my presence ruined her peace. I smiled faintly. They thought I was broken. They thought I was finished. That illusion would soon be my greatest weapon. I dressed carefully that day, not in anything grand, just a clean shirt, pressed trousers, polished shoes. I wanted to look like a man who still had dignity, not a beggar crawling for scraps. When I reached the study, I opened the leather folder again, the one holding the old share certificates. My fingers ran over the faded ink, the paper that had once been worth more than gold. And now, as Mr. Harris had told me, they were worth even more. I dialed his number. "Mr. Collins," he answered quickly, his voice calm but excited. "I was hoping to hear from you. Have you thought about my proposal?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "Set up a meeting. Today." By noon, I was sitting in his office again. The air smelled of ambition, fresh ink, polished desks, the click of keyboards. For a moment, I almost felt young again. Harris leaned forward. "Sir, these shares can be used as leverage. We can merge with smaller companies, form a base. But if you want true power back, you must invest strategically. Not just for money, but for influence." "Influence," I repeated softly. That was what I had lost. Not just wealth, not just comfort, but the respect that came with power. He laid out documents, charts, projections. My eyes scanned them quickly. Numbers never frightened me. They had always been my language. "We'll start here," I said, pointing to the first opportunity. "Move quietly. No one must know." Harris smiled. "Understood." And so began the second life of Edward Collins. Every morning, while my son thought I was taking a slow walk to strengthen my heart, I was actually sitting in boardrooms, signing papers, negotiating deals. Every evening, while my daughter-in-law mocked me for watching old man shows on TV, I was reading market reports under the cover of a newspaper. They had no idea. To them, I was still the burden. To me, they had become my fuel. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, carefully, I rebuilt. I invested in tech startups. I bought silent shares in logistics firms. I shook hands with men half my age who looked at me with awe when they learned of my past. And every day, I grew stronger. Inside, the scar in my chest healed little by little. But the scar in my heart? That one deepened, hardened, until it became something else entirely. A weapon. One evening, as I returned home, I overheard laughter from the living room. My son and daughter-in-law were talking. "He's so clueless," she sneered. "Still talking about his old company. Doesn't he realize no one cares about him anymore?" My son chuckled. "Yeah, he's just old. Honestly, I think we should get him to sign the house over. He doesn't even need it. We'll put him somewhere comfortable." "Comfortable?" she scoffed. "A nursing home would be perfect. Imagine the peace we'd have here." I froze in the hallway. A nursing home. For me, the man who had built this very house brick by brick. My fists trembled. My breath came sharp and heavy. In that moment, my revenge solidified. It was no longer a possibility. It was a promise. The breakthrough came sooner than I expected. Harris called me one afternoon, excitement in his tone. "Sir, there's an opportunity, a company in trouble. If we move fast, we can acquire it." "What company?" I asked. "Your son-in-law's For a moment, the room went silent. I felt my pulse race, not from weakness, but from sheer disbelief. Fate itself was handing me the blade. "Proceed," I whispered. Over the next weeks, the acquisition unfolded in silence. Paper after paper, signature after signature. I hid every document in my study drawer, beneath old magazines, where no one would look. At dinner, I listened to my son-in-law boast about business deals he barely understood, about profits that were already slipping from his grasp. My daughter-in-law giggled, proud of his supposed success. And all the while, I held the secret that his empire was already mine. It was like watching children build sandcastles on the shore, laughing, not realizing the tide was coming. Finally, the day came. Harris entered my study, his face glowing with triumph. "It's done. The company is yours. He doesn't even know it yet." I sat in silence for a long moment. Then slowly, I smiled. The taste of victory was sharper, sweeter than I had ever imagined. That evening, I sat alone in my room. The photo of my late wife hung above the bed. I stared at her face, remembering her voice. "Don't let bitterness eat you alive, Edward. Forgive where you can, but never let injustice win forgiveness." Could I? I shook my head. Not yet. The wound was still bleeding. But justice? That I could give. The next morning, the first crack appeared. I was reading the newspaper when my son-in-law stormed into the house, pale and trembling. My daughter-in-law rushed to him. "What happened?" she demanded. His voice broke. "The company. It's gone. Someone bought controlling shares. I've lost everything." Her jaw dropped. "What do you mean, gone? Who? How? I don't know," he whispered, collapsing onto the couch. "But whoever it is, they're ruthless." I lowered the newspaper slowly, hiding the small smile tugging at my lips. Ruthless. Yes, that was me. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. And oh, how sweet it tasted. That night, as the house sat in silence, I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. The game had only just begun. I whispered into the dark. "They left me in a hospital. They called me a burden. But today, I own everything they loved." The war was not over. It had only started, and this time I would not just survive. I would conquer. The night after my son-in-law lost his company, the house felt different. For years, this place had been filled with their laughter, their careless words, their endless reminders that I was no longer needed. But tonight, silence lingered like smoke after a fire. I sat in my chair, pretending to be asleep while they whispered in the kitchen. "This can't be happening," my daughter-in-law muttered. "We worked too hard for this." "Someone destroyed everything in a single move." Her voice cracked, a mix of anger and fear. My son slammed his fist on the table. "I'll find out who did this. Nobody humiliates me like this and gets away with it." I almost laughed. Humiliation? He hadn't tasted even a fraction of what he fed me. Nights in the hospital, days in this very house when I was invisible, those were humiliation. And now, it was their turn. But still, I kept silent. The time for truth had not yet come. The following days were chaos. My son-in-law's phone never stopped ringing. Creditors, lawyers, former partners, all demanding answers he couldn't give. My daughter-in-law, once arrogant and sharp-tongued, now looked pale and restless. I watched them crumble piece by piece, their empire collapsing faster than they had ever imagined. Meanwhile, my life outside the house grew stronger. Meetings, contracts, new investments. My second empire was being built in the shadows. I was no longer the weak man they abandoned at the hospital. Every morning when I looked in the mirror, I saw strength returning to my face. But revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came one evening when my daughter-in-law stormed into my room. "Why are you sitting here like a statue?" she snapped. "Don't you care that this family is falling apart? Can't you do something?" Her words were knives, but I smiled calmly. "What do you expect from an old man like me? You said it yourself. I'm just a burden." Her face turned red, but she didn't reply. She slammed the door behind her, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "They mocked me as a burden. Soon, they will realize I am the weight that crushes them." Weeks passed, and the truth began to circle closer. My son-in-law finally discovered a name, the mysterious buyer who had taken his company. It was me. He came home one evening, his face pale as ash. "It's him," he whispered to my daughter-in-law. "My father. He owns everything now." Her eyes widened, her mouth falling open. "What? That old man? That weak, useless man?" Her words no longer cut me. They were powerless now, because power itself sat in my hands. I stepped into the room, my voice steady. "Yes, the same old man you ignored, the same man you left in a hospital bed." The silence was heavy. They stared at me like I was a ghost risen from the grave. That night I finally spoke the words I had carried for so long. "You called me a burden. You wished for peace without me. But remember this, without me, you would not have this house, these clothes, this life. Everything you are, everything you own, came from me. And now, it has returned to me." My son stammered, "Dad, we didn't mean—" I raised my hand, stopping him. "Don't. Words mean nothing when actions speak louder." For the first time in years, I saw fear in their eyes, not of poverty, but of me. But even in victory, a strange emptiness crept into my chest. At night, when I lay in bed, I thought of my wife. What would she say if she saw me now? An old man, fueled by revenge, standing tall over his broken family. Her gentle voice echoed in my memory. Don't let bitterness eat your soul. Justice is good, but forgiveness makes you free. Was I free, or was I still chained to the hurt they caused me? One evening, my granddaughter, just 8 years old, knocked softly on my door. She stepped inside with her favorite toy in hand. "Grandpa?" she whispered. "Why is everyone so sad these days?" I looked at her innocent face, and for a moment, the storm inside me calmed. She didn't betray me. She didn't mock me. She was still pure. I bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Don't worry, little one. Everything will be all right." Her smile reminded me of better days, of love that was once real in this house. And in that moment, I realized my battle was not just about revenge. It was about deciding what kind of man I wanted to be in the end. As days turned to weeks, the question burned in me. Should I crush them completely, or should I leave space for forgiveness? The empire was mine again, my name once more respected in the business world. Yet inside, I knew the final choice would define the rest of my life. Justice had been served, but would forgiveness ever follow? That answer I kept for another day, because the story was not over yet. The judgment had been delivered. The gavel's sharp sound still echoed in my ears like thunder. My daughter lowered her head in the courtroom, tears streaming down her cheeks. My son-in-law sat frozen, his pride broken, his future uncertain. And I walked out of the hall with papers in my hand, but a storm inside my heart. Outside, reporters surrounded me. Cameras flashed. Microphones pushed near my face. "Sir, do you feel victorious? Will you forgive your daughter? Is this the end of the war?" I raised my hand and spoke only one line. "Justice is not about victory. It is about truth." Then I kept walking, each step heavy but steady. For years, I had carried the pain of betrayal, and now the law had returned what was mine. Yet strangely, there was no joy in me, only a tired relief. That night I sat in my study, the judgment papers beside an old photograph of my daughter as a child. In that photo she was 12, her face glowing with ice cream on her cheeks, her arms wrapped tightly around my neck. I whispered to the picture, "Where did that girl go? Where did the love disappear?" The photo gave no answer, only silence. My heart ached with the truth. The law can restore property, but it cannot restore broken trust. Weeks passed. Life slowly returned to routine. My house felt quieter, not healed, but calmer. I went back to my work, my old routines, my long walks in the evening. Letters began to arrive from my daughter, sometimes full of guilt, sometimes apology, and sometimes filled with nothing but silence between the lines. I never replied, but I kept every letter in a wooden box. Why? Because blood is blood. A father's heart is strange. It can burn with anger and still beat with love. Months later, fate gave me another twist. My son-in-law's failing company, drowning in debt, came up for auction. Without hesitation, I bought it with a single stroke of my pen. When the news reached my daughter, she came to see me for the first time since the court case. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Father, why did you do this?" she whispered. I looked at her, not with hatred, but with a calm fire in my eyes. "Because you need to understand. The man you betrayed is not weak anymore. You left me with nothing, and today I own everything you tried to steal." She broke down crying. For a moment my hand almost rose to hold her like I once did, but it froze in the air. Some distances, once created, can never be crossed again. That night I sat by the window, the city lights glowing like stars scattered across the earth. My journey had been long, painful, and filled with shadows. Yet here I was, still standing, stronger than ever. Revenge had given me balance. Justice had given me peace. But forgiveness, that was a question only the future could answer. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not destroying someone. It is rebuilding yourself so powerfully that no one can ever break you again. If you felt this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Your support keeps these stories alive.